Thank you everyone for coming. As Bob mentioned, I am Sarah Ruger. I direct our free expression work at the Koch Foundation and Institute. Been with Koch for about 8 years now, always in work related to higher education philanthropy and the promotion of free expression. So very excited to be here talking with you all today. This is a topic we take very seriously because we don't think it's possible to achieve our vision for a tolerant and peaceful and thriving, prosperous society without free expression. Ultimately, that's the medium by which all of those other virtues can be attained. So today, unfortunately, out there in the status quo, as you guys heard about at lunch, there are no shortage of threats to free speech, and we can't possibly cover them all in 45 minutes. So we're going to focus a lot of our conversation around the education of young people and threats to free speech on campus and how we can encourage an environment that better protects these rights and better fights back against a culture of intimidation through these lenses. And at the end, we'll share with you all some more resources for fighting for free speech on issues beyond the educational realm. But part of why we chose to focus here is because we're really concerned about the trend line around young people and their support or lack thereof for free expression. I don't know if you saw this recently, but Pew released a study that showed that while by a very slim margin the majority of millennials still support free speech, they make so many exceptions that kind of becomes meaningless. For example, 40% of millennials stated that they would support the censorship of speech deemed to be offensive. And what is offensive is pretty subjectively defined. So at that point, that right becomes a little bit meaningless. So we're focusing a lot on how to educate young people at the K through 12 level and ultimately on through the academy why these values are intrinsically important and what they can do to protect it. So quick roadmap for our conversation today. We've got a great panel here of folks who are going to tell you what the threats look like and what we can do to fix it. I'll give you an introduction in just a second. Then we're going to save time. I'm going to ask them a couple questions after they speak for about 5 minutes each, and then save some time for you all at the end to ask questions. Then I'll wrap with a recap of the resources that we can provide and the resources that are out there for you in terms of some of the great organizations doing work on these topics, depending on what types of threats to speech most concern you. But just to introduce our three panelists today, we're going to start with David Bob, who is the president of Bill of Rights Institute since 2013. He has worked for 20 years at the intersection of civic engagement and education reform. He's taught courses in American politics and public policy on the history and political science departments at both Boston College and Hillsdale College, and was the founding director of a national civic education program for high school teachers and the Alan P. Kirby Jr. Center for Citizenship and Constitutional Studies in D.C. He's designed online educational programs that are used by more than 500,000 participants and is a nationally recognized proponent of civic education, engaging hearts and minds of millions of students. I need to check this out. He's the author of Humility, an unlikely biography of America's greatest virtue. I hope that gets widely read because it's very needed right now. And do check out all of his writings in the Wall Street Journal and Fast Company, many other publications. He's earned his PhD in political science from Boston College, receiving fellowships from Pew, Earhart, and Bradley Foundation, some of our great friends in philanthropy. David and his wife, Anna, have two sons, Walker and Michael. And after David kind of lays the groundwork for why these principles matter, we'll turn it over to Cliff Maloney Jr., who can kind of give us the report from the front lines on campus. Cliff joined Young Americans for Liberty. He's now the head there in 2001. After his role as Pennsylvania state chairman, he's now YAL's president and previously served as the national youth director for Rand Paul's 2016 presidential campaign committee, where he managed students for Rand and mobilized more than 500 chapters nationwide. Prior to that campaign, he worked as a Northeast regional director for YAL, where he grew the Northeast to over 160 YAL chapters, which is just incredible growth. So he knows his stuff from the campus space. And in 2014, he served as youth director on Igor Berman for Congress campaign, and at that point decided to dedicate his life to the cause of liberty. And we are glad to have him there. Cliff was named the 2013 Ron Paul Liberty Scholar, is a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown, class of 2014, with a BA in education and a BS in theater arts, which we're going to have to hear more about. And last but not least, we have Casey Mattox. Casey serves as Senior Counsel and Director of the Center for Academic Freedom with Alliance Defending Freedom. Casey joined ADF in 2009, litigating cases to protect First Amendment rights of students and faculty at colleges across the country. Since December 2016, he served as the Director of ADF Center for Academic Freedom, where he leads a team of attorneys on what is a very active group of litigators defending First Amendment rights on college campuses. And prior to ADF, Casey litigated university free speech issues with the Christian Legal Society's Center for Law and Religious Freedom. That was from 2004 to 2009. He's testified 3 times before House committees on a variety of First Amendment-related topics. He's also made numerous media appearances, USA Today, Federalist, Town Hall, lots of again, friends. And if you would prefer the briefer 140 characters or less versions, you can find him at Casey Mattox on Twitter. I think all of us have handles on there, so be sure to check that out. He earned his JD from Boston College Law School in 2001, clerked for the Alabama Supreme Court, and he'll close us out with a sense of what the policy and legal landscape looks like for these issues and what we can do to defend it. So with that, we'll turn it over to questions for you all at the end, but David will kick us off.
Well, thank you, Sarah, very much, and thank you, Bob, for the opportunity to join you all here. This is a vital topic, and before I jump in, I have to start with a trigger warning.
Oh.
This comes from, and this is not something that I created, but it's a publisher made an edition of the Declaration and the Constitution. On the inside cover, it says this: "This book is a product of its time and does not reflect the same values as it would if it were written today. Parents might wish to discuss with their children how views on race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, and interpersonal relations have changed since this book was written before allowing them to read this classic work."
For shame.
Declaration and the Constitution. Now, this publication has the audacity to state that, but I'll tell you that a lot of our textbooks believe the same thing, they just don't put it that boldly. What we do at the Bill of Rights Institute is stand as a bulwark against that, you might say, kind of mainstream content, the content that is approved by our state legislatures, funded by taxpayers, and disseminated widely in our public schools such that students are learning that the Declaration and the Constitution no longer have any purchase on their lives today. We publish curricula, there's information in the back there, and my purpose really in this couple of minutes is to tell you a little bit about what I'm seeing at the secondary level, but even more to lay the philosophical groundwork. Why must we fight this fight today? Why must we engage in this debate? You know, it's interesting what we've learned at the Bill of Rights Institute in working with about 1/4 of America's teachers. So about 1 in 4 of the educators in the social studies, the civics, the history realm are part of our network, including about 1,300 in this state. And what they tell us is that they really struggle to bring up and talk about the controversial issues that they really feel that they should need. And that's because in large measure they don't feel like they would have any backup from their administrators. And oftentimes they feel like the parents would be very upset and in fact would not support the discussion of controversial issues. What has resulted then is that if you believe that snowflakes are now sort of occupying our campuses, the snowflake making machines are our high schools. And what happens over and over again is that we're not equipping the students with the habits of heart and mind to seek out opinions other than their own and to esteem intellectual diversity. Teachers don't want to tackle these tough questions or aren't up to the task, and too often what happens is the students pick up on this reluctance and they clam up. They self-censor. And I think this self-censorship is one of the most pernicious things that's happening in this country today. For how do you count the number of human beings, young souls, those who are working in Silicon Valley, those who are on our college campuses, as you'll hear from my colleagues, who decide that it's not worth it to voice their own opinions? You know that view of space, from space of North Korea at night, totally blacked out? That kind of darkness is the situation anywhere where there's no free speech. When the light of the mind is snuffed out and human beings are stifled from expressing their viewpoint, liberty is lost. It's that simple. No free speech, no justice. A few years ago, I had a chance to interview a young woman who had defected from North Korea. She was all of 20 years old. I asked her why she wanted to participate in the program on which I was serving as an interviewer, and she said, because when my people are reunited, not if, when my people are reunited, I want them to be able to learn about freedom. And I thought, wow, I'm talking to a young Solzhenitsyn, right? I'm talking to a young soul who understands what free speech means, because in fact, she lived throughout her young life in a society in which you must conform to a reality that you know is not true, right? The regime maintains a kind of surreality that everybody must acknowledge, but in their heart of hearts, they know is not really true. That great Russian dissident, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, said, "Live not by lies." Free speech, free expression is premised on the idea that a marketplace of ideas is the means by which human beings, acting in their capacity as citizens, can sort out truth from lies. Now, in our own tradition, we face that same challenge today. Are we going to live by the search for truth, or are we going to live by lies? Some of the information that is available in the back there comes with a little bit of a wink. We work with high school students, so we've produced 4 individuals and a sticker that shows George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Frederick Douglass, and the great suffragette whose story is featured there. And each of them has a quotation. Alice Paul, the suffragette, said this, quote, "In the end, our convictions will prove stronger than their authority." And I'll leave you with a quotation from Frederick Douglass. He said, "Truth was powerful. An individual armed with truth is a majority against the world." Thank you.
Now, Cliff, if you could tell us what it's like on the front lines of college campuses today.
The word I used to describe it when I was on Fox Business is a battlefield. And I don't say that word lightly. I think that those that are promoting free markets, limited government, people on campus, typically those in higher up positions, don't tend to agree or care for the message we're trying to get out. And so I want to talk to you guys a little bit today about what we're doing to combat this, what we're doing to spread the message on campus of constitutional government. So Young Americans for Liberty, we have over 900 chapters on US-based college campuses. And our goal is pretty simple. We identify, educate, train, and mobilize youth activists committed to winning on those principles we care about. And I took over the organization about a year ago, and I will tell you that I was very interested. I went to school to teach math. I was very interested in looking at things from a simple perspective and trying to figure out, okay, what exactly is happening here? And what we found, and especially I got to thank the guy to my right with Alliance Defending Freedom, groups like FIRE that are out there really showing us what the root problem is. And that root problem are unconstitutional speech codes. They are what we call free speech zones, different from safe spaces. We can talk about that some other time. But these free speech zones that have popped up on campuses are what these bureaucrats are using to shut down people that they tend to not agree with. And so let me give you an example of what that looks like. Let's say this whole room is the campus, okay? The bureaucrats will say, where's Ben? Ben, raise your hand in the back. Let's say the 1 foot by 1 foot, area where Ben is in the back there is the free speech zone. Okay, and what that means, it's free speech zone, right? What is the rest of campus? The non-free speech zone? Who gets to dictate what is said there? And so what happens is if our kids are out, let's say they're over here, away from the free speech zone, handing out this extremely controversial document called the United States Constitution, what happens is they'll shut us down. But what people really fail to realize here is other groups, okay? Other groups might be out, Bernie's socialist group, promoting a 90% tax rate. Who says anything? And to be honest with you, I'm not looking to really paint a picture of the selective enforcement, but it happens. What I'm looking to do is get rid of those free speech zones that they can use to shut our students down who are trying to get the message out. And so as an organization, we launched something called the National Fight for Free Speech Campaign. And what this is a targeted effort to go after these codes or these free speech zones that they use to shut down conservative and liberty-minded students. With those 25 campuses, if you just look at it in terms of how many students we were able to restore, their right to free speech, which sounds pretty insane when you think about the First Amendment, it's over 540,000 students that now are able to hear our message and be exposed to constitutional government. But what's happening out there is, we're finding specific incidents where it's not just they're getting shut down. We call it triggering the university when they shut our students down. But there are plenty of cases out there that are ongoing. We've had incidents, and we're working that backlog. But I want to share with you one example that really was the extreme, that really set us over the edge of the hypocrisy of these bureaucrats. We had a young female chapter leader. She's a Young Americans for Liberty chapter president at Kellogg Community College. Now, I want to be clear about this. This is a community college. Our entire effort is focused on public campuses. Private schools, we believe in property rights. They can do as they please. We're focused on public universities, taxpayer-funded schools that are supposed to uphold the Constitution, and more specifically, the First Amendment. And we had a student there. She was approached, handing out pocket constitutions. They said, "You've got to go into the free speech zone." And she said, "Well, excuse me." She says, politely, she said, "Well, sir, I have a right to be here." And so they actually arrested her, put her in jail overnight, and Casey here is representing her. So a big round of applause for this guy for putting his money where his mouth is. But talk about the hypocrisy. These are the types of cases we're seeing throughout the country. This is why we've launched this National Fight for Free Speech campaign. And I'll end by saying this. We're not looking for an advantage for conservative and liberty-minded students. We don't want an advantage. We just want a level playing field where we can go out, where we can educate, where we can expose these ideas to as many students as possible. Because believe me, they're not getting in the classroom. And I'm proud to be here today, proud to tell you guys that we're out there fighting the good fight for free speech.
Casey, maybe you can walk us through what the legal landscape looks like, the policy landscape looks like, because there are other ways to address these issues beyond the great work that Cliff's doing on campus.
So I'll begin with this story. In the spring of 2016, Young Americans for Freedom at Cal State Los Angeles decided that they wanted to bring Ben Shapiro to campus. How many of you know who Ben Shapiro is? Great guy, hilarious, particularly on Twitter. You should follow him there. So they decided they wanted to bring Ben Shapiro to campus. And as far as I could tell, this would be the first time they'd actually had a conservative speaker at Cal State Los Angeles in forever, as far as anyone knew. So they decided they would do that. Well, the first thing that they heard from the university was, well, you're going to have to pay a security fee. Your security to have been here is going to be several $100s. Remember, this is a group of students. Several $100s you're going to have to pay to bring Ben because we deem him controversial, which of course is up to the school. They decide which speakers are controversial and which ones not, and which ones get a sort of a tap conservative ideas, right? Because you're the controversial side. So first of all, we pushed back on that, and eventually the school said, okay, we won't charge you that. Instead, we're just going to cancel the whole thing altogether. The students said, well, no, we're going to go ahead and go forward. We've already brought Ben here. We're going to move forward with this thing. So what happened then was faculty and administration, particularly faculty, started posting online, encouraging other students to come out and actually protest Ben's event, and then ultimately to lock arms and prevent people from getting inside to hear Ben Shapiro speak. So they did, and you can see a video of the whole exchange that's on our website. And of course, the fascinating part of this is that the topic of Ben Shapiro's speech was freedom of speech. But this is not just a blue state problem. At the exact same time, North Carolina State University, right here, right? State had a policy that required 5 days advance notice for any, quote, oral or written communication anywhere on campus. You heard me right. Here's the kicker. The North Carolina, NC State, decided they would actually defend that policy. This is frankly the kind of policy that when we challenge it, we expect that the government is going to see this, and some lawyer up the chain is going to say, guys, you've got to give this to me before you start enacting policies like this. This is crazy. And they didn't. They went to a federal judge in Raleigh here and said, we think this is a perfectly constitutional policy. We have to have control of what people are saying. So we need to know 5 days in advance before anyone says anything anywhere on campus at NC State. Of course, the federal district judge did not cotton to that argument very well, and he enjoined it. But ultimately, it's a far less dramatic situation at NC State than it was at Cal State Los Angeles, but it's the same effect. Speech is shut down in either case. At UNC Wilmington, we represented Mike Adams, good friend of mine. If you know him well from town hall columns and many other places, a multi-year battle against UNC Wilmington to make sure that he was able to be a professor at UNC Wilmington and actually take conservative positions in his writing. The free speech problem on campus is impacting our campuses all over the country. Red states, blue states, but that's not the worst of it. It's also impacting our future. Because if students that are on campus now are going to be tomorrow's judges and our legislators and our voters, they're going to teach your children. When I started litigating these kinds of cases, we had to argue that there was actually a free speech problem on campus. And people on the left denied that there was any kind of problem. People on the right would often see some of these conservative students standing up and would think they should just be quiet, keep their heads down, and get an education. And they didn't even want to believe that some of the problems were really problems. And now, fortunately, one of the benefits of some of the more high-profile things that we've seen happening on campus is that people across the spectrum now, a lot of people on the left are acknowledging that there's a problem that needs to be addressed. So what can we do about it? I'm an attorney. So obviously the first thing that I think we can do about it is sue them. So I lead our Center for Academic Freedom. We've probably been one of the most active groups of folks actually suing and challenging these policies around the country over the last decade or so. We have about 400 different wins, both in and out of court over the last decade. 90% in court, we challenge these policies. We have been engaged in 14 different courtroom battles just in this past year, litigating against a variety of First Amendment issues that students are experiencing on campuses around the country, and I'm not tired of winning yet. So that's the first thing we can do. We have to challenge them, sue them, and make sure that these policies get set. But we can also win some of our 400 wins. A lot of those 400 wins come from out of court. So we can also send letters. We do a lot of demand letters. We work with allied attorneys that we train around the country. We send a lot of demand letters to schools telling them these are unconstitutional policies. Let us help you fix them, and we make a lot of progress in doing that. And then finally, we work with local. Fitzgerald here? No, okay, no Tammy. North Carolina Values Coalition. We work with folks like her and many of the folks in this room around the country to help pass good state laws, because ultimately these are taxpayer-funded institutions. And if these taxpayer-funded institutions are not actually advancing freedom and helping to ensure freedom going forward, but instead are undermining freedom and undermining the next generation of how the Constitution works, they should not be receiving our taxpayer dollars. So there's a variety of ways we can attack this. I think all of them are valid, and hopefully in the conversation that will come, we can discuss some other possibilities for ways we can address the problem.
Stacey? So I've just got one follow-up question for our panelists, and then I want to see what questions you guys have and have others if we have extra time. Unfortunately, a lot of the examples that you heard here today are not the exception. They're becoming the rule. And you know, our hardest challenge today in getting up on this panel and making these 5-minute spiels was actually picking which stories to tell you. And the good thing about that, as several of the panelists hinted at, is that a lot of folks are getting fired up about this and are trying to figure out what they can do about it. The flip side of that, these folks talked about the good things, the principled things you can do to fight for free speech. There are some unproductive tactics out there as well. I was hoping some of you guys could speak to what you're seeing that isn't working and why. You know, our perspective on this, we're seeing a lot of counter-intimidation or counter-censorship, and especially as is the case in higher education, but really society at large. If you fight fire with fire, you risk burning the whole place down. So, Cliff, I'm looking at you in terms of how this manifests on campus, and Casey in particular on the policy side as well.
Yeah, well, I'll dive in. somebody asked me once, they said, you know, what makes you guys different? Because sometimes people are fighting back and, you know, they're reverting to emotion. And this is where I think there's really a big difference between us that are fighting for, you know, pro-limited government, pro-liberty policies versus the left. And that is, we're not letting emotion be the leading factor. We're not making fun of others. We're not attacking people based on, you know, things other than the actual policy and the principle. And what I said to the person, I said, look, if a socialist comes to campus, you won't find Young Americans for Liberty members burning the campus to the ground or throwing rocks through the windows, right? And I mean, it's the honest truth. We want an open dialogue. We want an open debate. We want to be able to have conversations. And here's the kicker, because we think our ideas are actually ways that the country can move forward, that are prosperous for everybody. And the response, I was actually in a debate with somebody who was probably on the other side of that. You know, they don't understand that we don't need to attack emotion. We don't need to latch onto that. And of course, I think that's the easy way out. And I think that's one of the, that intimidation factor that people on the right, they say, oh, well, they're intimidating us, we want to intimidate back. I think if we lead by example and that type of mentality of let's have an open conversation, figure out ways to actually get our ideas out there, when people hear it, when people understand the message of conservative and libertarian ideas, they come our way. And so I guess I would say moving away from the intimidation and figuring out different ways to penetrate peacefully, if you will, and stay above the fray.
Casey, what's this look like in the policy realm? I just saw a policy come up in Arizona recently that tried to ban progressive education. What's your take on that approach? And what are better alternatives out there?
Yeah, no, I agree with my friend Cliff. I mean, you know, we don't need to ban other people's speech because, frankly, we think our ideas are right? So if you give me a platform where my ideas can be expressed, the other side can express their ideas, I think I'm going to win, because I think if people can hear both sides, they're going to be persuaded by what we have to say. But I think one of the things we really have to be careful about right now, frankly, I understand. I mean, you look at what's going on at Berkeley, you look at what's going on at Middlebury College, there is a strong instinct to think, let's regulate and fix this. Let's force these people to not do this. And that leads to a sort of illiberal, not conservative result, unfortunately, or it can, right? There are constitutional, conservative ways to address this without saying, okay, well, we're going to grab those folks and force them to conform. And I think when you enact policies that require the school to eliminate any sort of rules that are restricting student-free speech, that's the best way to go. When you start trying to enact things that say, and we're going to punish particularly students for interfering with others' expression, again, I get it, why people want to enact a rule like that. Here's the problem. University administrators are almost exclusively on the left. And if you give an inordinate amount of power to people on the left and expect that is somehow going to end up advancing conservatism, it's not going to work, right? You can't give power to a university administrator. Here's how that plays out. If you tell students, if you interfere with other people's expression, then you're going to be automatically suspended or automatically expelled. Here's how that plays out. You have students at UC Berkeley who decide that they're going to protest against, even get violent against some conservative speaker. Well, you're always going to have some kind of discretion, right? And the university administrator is going to say, well, look, just don't do it again, right? You threw a Molotov cocktail this time. I'm just reminding you that the next time you're going to be in trouble. And at the same time, on another campus, you have a group from Students for Life, and they're 100 yards away from Cecile Richards speaking. And university administrators who don't like the fact that they're out there in the first place come by and start telling them, look, I just want to remind you so you're being careful, because I'm here to try to help, that if you interfere in any way with her expression, I have to suspend you. So I just wanted to remind you as you're going about your day, right? And so they start chilling student speech that's on the conservative side. I just have very little hope that if we start imposing mandates like that they're actually going to be advancing. I think we can eliminate the speech rules, eliminate the speech codes, all those sorts of things without imposing or giving new power to administrators to punish student speech.